Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward.
And I'm Melissa Ridge, and it's a first for APTN National News. We commissioned Environics research to find out what's on the minds of Indigenous voters as we head towards federal election this month. It polled just over 1,000 people who were asked who they want as Prime Minister and what their most pressing issues are.
APTN's Todd Lamoran shows us the results. But first, let's take a trip back to the 2015 election and a few highlights from the last 4 years.
4 years ago, Robert Falcon-Ouellette was just one of 10 Indigenous candidates elected members of Parliament. 8 for the Liberals and 2 for the NDP. Several Indigenous people and leaders attended the Liberal government's swearing in. So it's no surprise that when Environics research asked 1,024 Indigenous people how they voted in 2015, half said they voted Liberal, followed by 20% NDP, 19% Conservative, and 9% Green. But voters have soured on Justin Trudeau and the Liberal brand. Now, only 21% of those polled would vote Liberal. Conservatives are on top with 26%, followed by the NDP at 17%, and the Greens right behind at 16%. And there is a large undecided segment of 16%. The Environics poll broke party support down by identity. 37% of Métis favored the Conservative Party. 18% the Liberals, 14% Green, and only 9% the NDP. First Nations support was almost evenly split among the parties. 23% Liberals, 22% NDP, the Conservatives at 19%, and the Greens at 17%. Inuit also favored Conservatives with 24%. The Liberals and Greens tied at 19% support, and the NDP only 5%. However, Inuit have a large number of undecided at this point, with 32% not knowing which way they'll vote. But the support could change by election day. Half of those asked may change their mind. Conservative and Liberal support is the most solid at 59% and 57%, not likely to change their minds. The NDP is next at just over half, 52%, who may change their minds. While Green support is weakest at 68%, may place their X somewhere else on election day. The environment was identified as the most pressing issue by 23%, followed by government and the economy, both at 18%, cost of living at 13%, and near the bottom, only 6% identified truth and reconciliation and Indigenous rights as a pressing concern, while pipelines and cuts to social programs are both 5%. The poll broke down some of the most pressing issues into separate categories. For example, with the environment, 86% said it was very or extremely important that drinking water should be a top federal election issue, followed closely by protecting lakes, rivers, and oceans at 84%, then climate change and renewable energy tied at 70%, while resource development, like mines and pipelines, fell into last place with 51%. The Environics study did say that 72% of those asked will definitely vote. That would be a record number, but pre-election studies of this type often have a higher number than the actual turnout. Todd Lamoran, APTN National News, Ottawa.
A lot of interesting stuff there. Sarah Robertson handled the research of the election poll for APTN. She's the Vice President of Corporate and Public Affairs for Environics, and joins us from our Ottawa studio to talk about the poll and share insight on the results. Sarah, thanks for joining us. How did you find the people to participate in this poll, and how was Environics able to confirm their identity as Indigenous peoples?
That's a really good question. Indigenous peoples are a relatively small proportion of the overall Canadian population, so calling them can be difficult and challenging to find. So instead what we did, at least in the provinces, is an online poll of Indigenous peoples. There are panels that exist that have been created of members who've agreed to participate in surveys, and we chose to use one of those to reach Indigenous peoples in the provinces. And as one of our first screening questions, we asked them if they identify as a First Nations, Métis, or Inuk person. In the territories, it's a little bit different. You can't use online panels. There's not enough membership in the territories. So up there, we did need to do telephone interviews. So we were calling directly into households and asking to speak to an Indigenous person there.
And so as we heard, Liberal popularity has declined among respondents. You linked this to Justin Trudeau. Why is that?
Mainly because, at least from what the research told us, his popularity rating is quite low. His approval rating is lowest of any of the major party leaders. So looking at that suggested to us that that may be one of the reasons why the intention to vote Liberal has dropped so significantly since the reported vote from 2015.
Despite Trudeau's weak approval ratings among the party leaders, he was still the second best choice for Prime Minister in a different poll question. Can you explain that?
So the difference there is that the approval ratings are highest for the leaders of the smaller parties, the NDP and the Greens, but there's a significant proportion of people who feel that they're not familiar enough to really give a judgment there. So when we take it up to who would be the best Prime Minister, that lack of familiarity factors into it. And in fact, what it means that Scheer is number one in terms of best PM, followed by Trudeau. And then the NDP and the Green leaders are in third and fourth place.
And so you found that more than half of the Indigenous vote is still up for grabs. How does that compare to non-Indigenous voters, and which parties stand to benefit?
That's a good question, and I'm not familiar with the national numbers. I think what I would say is that right now, with that, every vote counts, and therefore I think that the parties will be looking at that Indigenous number in terms of what's up for grabs or what's still to be determined, and thinking very carefully about how they might benefit from that.
So some might be surprised to learn that while concerns around the environment, climate change, and drinking water were top priorities, reconciliation and Indigenous rights ranked far lower. How was it decided to separate issues of clean drinking water and the environment from Indigenous rights and reconciliation?
So we asked the questions in two ways. The first question was what we call an unprompted question. What's the most important issue facing the country right now? And then people were allowed to mention any issue that they felt was kind of the top or number one issue. That's where environment and climate change rose to the top. When later on in the survey, what we did was we gave people a number of different issues that are on the public agenda right now or on the radar, and asked them how likely it is that they'll base their vote on those issues. So when we asked it that way, drinking water quality, cost of living, such as food and housing, rose to the top, as well as government policies that will affect people directly. And truth and reconciliation issues were a secondary tier. I wouldn't say that they're unimportant. In fact, very few people, less than 1 in 10, say that that consideration would not affect their vote. But they didn't make the top tier, which is more in terms of quality of life issues for people directly and personally.
So you point out that many of the poll's findings suggest a fair degree of uncertainty in respondents' outlook for Canada and for themselves and their families. Which questions and responses led you to that conclusion?
So we asked some questions right up front at the beginning of the survey to try to gauge the context in which Indigenous peoples are approaching the vote. What is it that's on their minds? And so we asked some questions around, are they struggling to make ends meet? 7 in 10 agreed that they were. A significant majority told us that it's not a good time for them to be buying the things that they want or need. So there's a low consumer confidence there. And there's some split in the population in terms of whether they think the country's going in the right or the wrong direction. So I would suggest that there's some pessimism at play there, some issues that households and individuals are struggling with from their own perspective that are going to play into how they decide to vote in the election.
Well, Sarah, we'll have to leave it there, but appreciate you joining us, and thanks for your work on this.
Thank you very much.
On the heels of a scathing report earlier this week from the APTN Commission looking into abuses of Indigenous people by various Quebec public services, Premier François Legault today issued a public apology to the First Nations and Inuit people of Quebec for injustices and discrimination pervading the province's public sectors. Addressing a silent house at the National Assembly, Legault offered the, quote, most sincere apology from the whole Quebec state, admitting that provincial officials failed in their duties and historically did not heed the calls for change from Indigenous communities. He says that Quebec will review and respond to the recommendations made in the report, but out of respect, they will not impose solutions.
Comme pour le Québec tout entier, on doit faire plus, on doit faire mieux, on doit le faire avec les membres des Premières Nations et les Inuits. Comme je le disais dans mon discours inaugural, on doit travailler ensemble à développer le Québec pour le bien commun de nos nations respectives.
Well, a dangerous and all too common occurrence unfolded in Iqaluit today.
The details on that after the break. First, here's Thursday's weather forecast.
Starting on the East Coast, sunny and 14 for Halifax, showers and 7 in St. John's, 7 and a chance of snow for Nain, chance of snow and 6 for Happy Valley Goose Bay, 9 under sunny skies for Montreal and Quebec City, 14 with showers in Toronto, rain and 11 in Ottawa. Rain-snow mix for Thunder Bay and a high of +5, 7 with a chance of snow in Sioux Lookout. +8 under sunny skies in Churchill, 10 in God's Lake. 11 with showers for Winnipeg and Gimli, partly cloudy, and 11 for Dauphin. 10 with showers in Regina, sunny skies, and 12 in Saskatoon, +12 in Uranium City and La Ronge.
Back. Iqaluit residents woke up to what's increasingly not a rare occurrence this morning. An area of the Nunavut capital was blocked off due to an armed standoff. Iqaluit RCMP responded to a call for assistance just after midnight and had a small portion of the city blocked off to traffic. RCMP described a possibly armed person barricaded in a residence with several other people in the lower Iqaluit section of the city. By 2 o'clock Eastern time this afternoon, so 14 hours after it began, RCMP reported that the incident was over. One suspect surrendered peacefully and is in custody. No one was injured, but this is Iqaluit's third standoff since July. Now joining us from Iqaluit is our Nunavut video journalist, Kent Driscoll. So, Kent, what part of the city did this happen in?
If you know Iqaluit at all, it's the area of the city I'm standing in behind me. Basically from the museum down the street to the Grind and Brew coffee shop, it's about a 500-meter stretch. And they were able to handle what they described as a, quote, armed and barricaded event with just the local RCMP. They didn't have to bring in RCMP officers from out of town. Municipal enforcement, our bylaw officers, and the EMTs were nearby to help out in case it was needed, but it was not.
And this isn't a rare event at all in Iqaluit, is it?
Oh, this is far from rare. The last standoff before this one was Labor Day weekend. The one before that was Canada Day weekend. We had a 3-day long one here in 2015, and that was really inconvenient. It was in the middle of a very crowded area, and there were some people trapped inside their homes for days. Many years ago, we had one at the hospital, and I remember that one as being terrifying to have someone in the hospital with a rifle.
Yeah.
But what you got to remember is Nunavut has the highest crime rate and the highest rate of violent crime in Canada. So this sort of thing is not unexpected. It's anticipated at this point.
So, I mean, everybody in Iqaluit hunts, everybody's got a gun. Are we seeing more of these types of incidents or fewer? What's going on?
From my point of view, from what I've seen, I don't think we're seeing any more of them. Now, as far as everyone having a rifle, one of the things that the RCMP does do here is they really try and encourage people to use trigger locks, and they hand them out for free at the detachment. Now, a trigger lock, for those of you who aren't familiar with long firearms, it's basically a lock you put on your trigger. It puts a key on your rifle, and that way, in case someone wants to take it spontaneously or grab it from you and try and use it in a fashion you didn't intend, they can't use it without your key. So that's one of the things that they've put in. The other major problem, of course, all of this stuff stems back to mental health issues, and mental health treatment's incredibly tough to get here in the territory. And like every other issue in Nunavut, all of those different factors compound upon each other. So it's a tapestry.
Yeah. Well, glad that nobody was injured. Thanks for adding some clarification and shedding some light on this. And you take care. Always good to hear from you.
Quanamique, Melissa.
Nations from all across British Columbia attended a two-day healing event on the grounds of the former Albany Indian Residential School on Vancouver Island. That's where survivors, family and friends used traditional ceremony and language to reclaim the lost souls of students that never returned home. And this story has very emotional content and may trigger some viewers.
A spiritual fire roars at the center of the former Alberni Indian Residential School in Sashot First Nation. From 1891 to 1973, Indigenous children from all across BC came to be educated and assimilated, but instead they were abused, molested, some even killed.
I remember going in the church, and as we're going in church, our minister would slap our heads. You savages, you heathens, you're nothing. And we felt that we're nothing. And we felt sad. It felt so sad to be a savage.
That nightmare still haunts generations of survivors, and also the lost souls that never returned home.
We needed to invite all tribes in British Columbia to bring their traditional language speakers to come down here on site and invite their lost souls back home where they belong.
The two-day healing event is the first of its kind at the site. There are two original buildings that are still standing, being used by the community. The rest have been torn down. Les Sam says his people have long lived with spiritual activity and a nasty mark on their traditional territory.
Our nation didn't have any say in having a residential school in our backyard. And what they've left us with is a large, gaping, open wound in our territory.
Many survivors will never return because the memories are too painful, but many did make it back as part of their healing journey. Lorna Bob, who spent 2 years at the school, says she came to connect with other survivors and to celebrate her Indigenous culture, something historically forbidden to do.
I felt myself overwhelmed with the healing. It was really strange to go through a spiritual healing, one of our cultural healings, right outside where the building was.
Although life at residential school was hell, Melvin Good was able to find some solace with his new family.
We really grew up together. We became all family. All the kids had Kishpioks, Hazelton, Hogoket, you know, they all became family, and we embraced each other. I love you, brothers. And they returned that love.
Jacqueline Watts attended the event with her granddaughters on behalf of her late mother, Linda May Watts. Linda didn't speak much of her 5 years at the school.
I knew I had to talk on her behalf, and that was the biggest and strongest message, was what you say matters. It's a very strong statement, because in residential school, I believe that she was sexually abused, because she had to go make a statement, and that was about the sexual abuse part.
Watts told the crowd of survivors that she was angry that the government's residential school independent assessment process opened up old wounds too heartbreaking for her mother to handle.
She never got to talk. She got sick after that. And I knew that I felt that it took her life. And she was unable to share her story.
Watts says the trauma from residential school goes far beyond the survivors.
I never understood why things were so hard, why I was a mother when she wasn't, why everybody was so angry, you know, why sexual abuse was so a norm. You know, and we're the next ones that we're the next layer that needs to be looked at, you know, the offspring of the survivors, because we have a lot to say. We were hurt also.
Survivors, family and friends of all ages opened up and shared their stories. Many were in tears, but not just tears of sadness. There were tears of love and laughter, gratitude and inspiration. The powerful event ended with everyone dancing and drumming into the night, proving that the resilience of Indigenous people can never be taken away. Lori Hamlin, APTN News, Port Alberni.
Emotional story there. Looks like quite the event.
Yeah.
Well, there is good news about a vandalized totem pole we told you about yesterday.
That's coming up after the break. First, here's the rest of tomorrow's weather.
Picking back up in northern Alberta, sunny and 14 in High Level, Peace River and Fort McMurray. Sunny and 13 for Medicine Hat, partly cloudy and 8 for Red Deer. Showers and 15 for Vancouver, 12 in Bella Coola. 13 in Fort Nelson, showers and 11 in Dease Lake. Snow for Old Crow with the high of 4, 2 in snow in Rock River. Partly cloudy and 13 for Fort Liard and Trout Lake. -8 is the high for Sax Harbor, snow and +3 in Pawlatuck. 0 for Repulse Bay and Whale Cove, +3 in snow for Baker Lake. -1 with a rain-snow mix in Arctic Bay, snow and -7 for Resolute. Welcome back. An art theft mystery in Montreal has a happy ending. A wooden hand stolen from a Charles Joseph totem pole located outside the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts was quietly returned overnight. The hand was removed by 2 hooded culprits early Friday morning, prompting a widespread social media campaign urging them to return it. A spokesperson confirmed Wednesday the hand was left on their doorstep overnight with a note expressing sincere apologies for an act committed while, quote, not in a sober state of mind. The museum is withdrawing their complaint and working to restore the piece to its original form.
That's pretty awesome of them.
Well,
do the right thing.
Nice
do the
of
right
them
thing
to return it, yes.
Yeah.
Well, that is your APTN National News for this Wednesday. For much more, visit our website, aptnnews.ca.
That's where you'll find a lot more on that Environics poll done for APTN News. You can also find the latest on the election that was held last night in Northwest Territories, where a record number of women were elected. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Thanks for tuning in.
And I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.